So now let's connect this back to what we're doing here, right? Why we've learned about this, we focused on the STEM side, but let's get real and have this wonderful conversation here. Here's the other mic. With Cindy Hasselbring. And Cindy is the K-12 Education Advisor of the Office of STEM Engagement at NASA. And then we have with us Joseph Dant with a very long title, Chief Safety and Mission Assurance Officer for the Launch Services Program at Kennedy Space Center.
Officially not a fan of how long my title is.
There you go. All right, take it away.
All right, well, thank you, Kelly, and thank you to the STEM Leadership Alliance for inviting us to participate in this session. I am super excited to have my, now it feels like teammates now, right, Joe? I mean, we work in different places.
It's
Joe
twice
Dant.
we've done this, so we're
Yes.
like family.
We're gonna get better every time, so this should be a good, right?
I think so.
Okay. So it is great to see you all, and we're really excited to be here. And actually, I have a clicker. Forgot to grab. So we're going to jump right into our presentation.
Space travel is hard and unforgiving. It's always been and always will be.
It's going to be hard. There's a new chance of death. Going in a little can through deep space, it's a very harsh environment.
We think you can come back, but nothing is certain.
There are all sorts of challenges we will face on deep space missions. Communication delays, radiation protection, isolation of the crew.
So it is not surprising that some would have us stay where we are.
There's never going to be zero risk. When you're breaking the bonds of gravity, that's just part of the deal.
And it is one of the great adventures of all time.
Okay, all flight controllers, go for landing. Retro, go. Fido, go. Right, go.
That challenge is one that we're willing to accept.
Surgeon, go.
Man in his quest for knowledge cannot be deterred.
Space is not just a destination. It changes you forever.
It'll be tough, really tough, but we have the right people for the job.
We have pressed the qualities for success into system after system.
This country of the United States was not built by those who waited and rested.
Pushed our people past every failure we can dream of.
We have never been more ready to meet the unknown.
Through Artemis, we will once again explore beyond our world.
And we will succeed.
So space isn't the only thing that is hard. Teaching is hard. And Dr. Pruitt yesterday had a little phrase, and we're going to maybe review that in his honor today. But you need, right, to teach. Students need, yes. And that couldn't be more true. And our country needs you because, again, it's critical for the future of our STEM workforce.
Yeah, so I have a little bit of a unique perspective. I'm married to a first grade teacher. I have 2 kids that are in elementary school age, and then I'm also, in the aerospace world working for NASA. And so I kind of get to see both, right? I understand what PBL is. I was so happy to hear a word that I knew what that meant. But anyway, yeah, like teaching is hard, space is hard. They're both challenging things. And what I would say to this group is that, when someone comes to an engineer, someone comes to NASA and says, oh, this is hard, that's almost like a rallying cry for us. It's like, all right, we're going to fix this. We're going to make it less hard. We're going to make it less risky, less dangerous. And so my hope today is that our talk will kind of invigorate this audience a little bit and let you know, yeah, what you guys are doing is really hard, and COVID did us no favors at all. But I think that we're going to come out of it stronger, tougher, and you guys are going to be tough as nails coming out of this. And I think that teaching is hard. It could be your rallying cry too. to make it better, to make it easier, and sort of lean into it instead of maybe running away from it, like sometimes we as humans have a tendency to do when things are hard.
Thank you, Joe. And I'm really glad you're here today. It's always great to see you. And you said you had a lengthy title that you're not a fan of, but could you tell us a little bit more in layman's terms what that means? How many words are in your title?
For short, I'm a CSO, and CSO is what NASA loves to do. It's like nested acronyms. Chief Safety and Mission Assurance Officer. So anyways, there's an acronym in my acronym. But anyway, so I lead a team of people. There's about 60 folks on my team, and we are part of a larger program called the Launch Services Program. And what our job, day to day, is to our customers, JPL, Goddard Space Flight Center, our friends in the European Space Agency, sometimes the Japanese Space Agency. They'll build this nifty little thing that needs to get put into space. And our job is to find them the right ride into space that manages to, that has low enough risk, right? If they're like a couple $1 million satellite and they are willing to take a whole bunch of risk, we'll find you a ride into space that takes those into account. You probably don't have a whole lot of money to buy the biggest, best rocket in the world. If you are a $4 billion orbiter going to Jupiter's moon, Europa, well then, by golly, we're going to find you the biggest rocket that we can find that has probably the highest probability of success. And so that's what my program does, from the acquisition of that commercial rocket to put your thing into space. And then I have folks in factories that actually watch the rocket get built up. I have folks at the launch site that watch the processing at the launch site. And then I have folks in the office that look at the analysis products that come in. And we are essentially the government's insurance policy, right? Companies like SpaceX, Northrop Grumman, United Launch Alliance, they design and build these rockets. They're not designed and built by NASA. The rockets that my program uses. But what government mission assurance does is the best rockets in the world are like 98 to 99% reliable. We're trying to find those 1 and 2% things that could take our mission out. The 1 and 2% things that could, make it so that the people of the United States, the people of the world, would miss out on this one-of-a-kind science mission. And so that's essentially what we do. We're like the government's insurance policy. We're trying to push that needle ever so closer to 100% instead of 95, 96, 97, 98%.
Yeah, that's very exciting. Sounds like a lot of work. This morning, we're going to talk a little bit about NASA's Next Gen STEM project, which is where our K-12 resources are. And then we're going to shift back to Joe and why we're returning to the moon. We looked at the video yesterday. We are going. That is on YouTube. If you're interested in sharing it with your students, Space is Hard that we just watched is on YouTube also. Easily found, you can easily find it. And then we're going to talk about the growing space industry, because I know I always hear from people, well, is NASA going away? What's up with SpaceX and all of these other industry partnerships? And then following that, we'll talk about how students get involved in NASA. And then later this morning, I'll have a conversation with Barbara Brown, and we'll get into the nitty-gritty details about the technology actually being worked on to live on the moon, which just my brain has been blown every time I talk to Joe and Barbara in planning for this session. So I know you're going to be really excited about both sessions. But let's just talk briefly about Next Gen STEM, which again is our K-12 project. And we have, and many of you probably looked online for K-12 resources at NASA. How many of you have done that before? Great, okay. Well, thank you for that. So we have on there lesson plans, educator guides, challenges and competitions, educator professional development through our Educator Professional Development Collaborative, and much, much more. Our EPDC, Educator Professional Development Collaborative, offers weekly webinars training educators on how to use these NASA STEM resources. And I'd like to mention also our newest resource for educators, our community of practice called Connects, which I'll talk about just in a minute. And then we also have many social media accounts that you can follow and see updates. I think I skipped a slide. No, I didn't. I'm sorry. Here we go. So we have a stem.nasa.gov website. We have the NASA Express newsletter, which is great. It comes out, I think, on Wednesdays, has lots of information in it. And then there's the social media accounts that we have. So Okay, so NASA Connects is something I want to talk briefly about. We're doing a session on this tomorrow. We do have a breakout session with our NASA team. Can you guys wave your hands? They're doing a breakout today and tomorrow, so love to have you join us for those. But NASA Connects is a community of practice for educators where you can access NASA content, but also collaborate. And I don't know about you, but when I was a teacher for 16 years, I always appreciated those side conversations at tables with your team, with your colleagues, and you could talk about teaching practices or strategies to engage students. And to me, those were the most valuable parts of attending a conference. And you know, when I would go back to my classroom, I always felt isolated because I didn't have anybody to bounce ideas off of. I mean, I had my classroom teachers in my hallway or whatever, but it wasn't the same as those passionate people that I met at conferences. So the idea behind this is to collaborate with people like that from all across the country. If you're hosting an elementary STEM night, you can pop a question in the community, ask people, and you'll get feedback pretty quickly for ideas and suggestions. So the other thing that we have in there is, besides NASA resources and abilities to collaborate, is special events for Connects members. So one event we had on May 4, Star Wars Day, is an event with Ricky Arnold, who is a current astronaut at NASA. And Ricky had the chance to talk with 30 schools, over 1,300 students, and they got to ask him questions directly. And it was just a fantastic time, but we will have regular events like that starting in the fall. So I wanted to mention that. We would love to have you join, love to have your colleagues join, so help us spread the good word about that, but we'll be talking more about that in a breakout tomorrow. All right, so Joe, we're gonna shift back to why we're going back to the moon, and I know that we have a lot of resources related to this we'll talk about a little bit later, but let's talk more about what NASA is doing now, especially like in the areas of engineering and technology, because it's pretty amazing how far ahead we are on this effort. Can you please give us a brief overview of what's happening at Kennedy Space Center in this area?
Sure, yeah. So, Kennedy Space Center's top priorities, and really the entire agency, NASA agency top priorities, are to get the Artemis 1 mission off the ground, safely and successfully. The Artemis 1 mission is an unmanned mission, uncrewed mission around the moon and back. And that will be the first step, the first mission of this next generation of lunar exploration, right? The goal is to get back to the moon, and not just to go and leave boot prints and flags, but to actually, to learn to live on the moon. And so, Barbara's going to talk a whole lot about that later, and she's definitely the expert on that. I'm just a rocket person, so. So it's get Artemis 1 off the ground, start the Artemis project, and then also, JFK, whenever he's talking and giving his speeches back in the 60s, we choose to go to the moon and do the other things. Well, what are the other things, right? NASA has other priorities other than just Artemis. It's not just all in going to the moon. We are launching crew from United States soil again back to the International Space Station for a long period of time, from 2013 to just a couple years ago. We had to rely on Russia to launch American crew to the space station. We've brought that capability back to the United States. We are going to continue launching crew to the International Space Station from U.S. soil using U.S.-built rockets. And then finally, the area that's really near and dear to me is all of these really cool uncrewed science robotic missions. Those aren't going away. In fact, we'll talk a little bit later about some of the missions that I'm really excited about, both now and in the next decade, that are going to just do absolutely exquisite, mind-blowing science. And actually, today, there's going to be a press conference showing the first actual science images from the James Webb Space Telescope. What a great time to be alive. James Webb will be able to see farther back in time than any telescope we probably could have even imagined 50 years ago. So yeah, I'm excited about all this stuff. Those are like NASA's priorities in a very, very tight nutshell.
And Joe, I know something you've explained to me before is we have the slide up with areas we've explored on the moon. And to a common person looking at the moon, it kind of looks the same, right? It's gray, doesn't have a lot of color like the Earth. But you've shared, we have a lot to uncover here. Can you talk a little bit more about what we see?
So what I like about this slide, is that a person could just say, oh, we've been to the moon. We landed 6 times. We brought a lot of rocks and stuff back. We drove around on the moon a bit, so our range was a little bit wider. But the surface area of the moon is about 50% more than the surface area of the North American continent. So to say that, well, I've been to North America 6 times, I know about everything that there is to know about it, is probably a little bit, it's not intellectually curious, I think, is maybe the word that I would associate with that. And then when I was making this slide, I had a realization, there's a whole other side of the moon we've never been to. And so go ahead and advance the animation. I learned PowerPoint in 2000, so I'm all about animation. Look at the difference between the near side and the far side of the moon. I didn't know that until I made this presentation slide, that it's geologically very different. Other cool things about the moon, South Pole, right? There's permanently shaded regions in the South Pole. And early in my career, we launched a mission called L-Cross, where we actually crashed the upper stage of a rocket into a permanently shaded area near the lunar South Pole. And we had another spacecraft fly through the plume, and they found water ice, evidence of water on the moon. So in the permanently shaded regions and under the surface of the moon, there's water. Finding water in space is almost like finding money in space, because there's so much you can do with water. So anyway, the moon is a very interesting place to go from a scientific standpoint. It's a very interesting place from an engineering and technology standpoint, because if you want to go to Mars, it's a whole lot better to make your mistakes and learn your lessons when you're 3 days away from home as opposed to 6 months away from home. So learning how to live on another planet, another celestial body is a big deal.
And I know that, we hear there's something about space in the news, it seems like every day, whether it be SpaceX, Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic, United Launch Alliance, whatever. So how do these impact NASA? Does this mean, NASA's going away? Are they competitive towards NASA? Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so, to answer the question directly, no. And it's a pretty common question, oh yeah, you guys must really hate SpaceX. I love SpaceX. The technology that they're bringing to bear is just tremendous. The ability to have a rocket booster fly back to land and then reuse it and then fly it 10, 11, 12, who knows how many times they're going to push their boosters before they find their limit, is tremendous. To be able to see that happening, literally outside my door. And then also, we, NASA, and the larger we, the government, the people of the United States, we are taking advantage of that in a very serious way. A competitive commercial launch vehicle market where you have SpaceX, United Launch Alliance, Blue Origin. You have successful vehicles being produced by all of them, successful rockets being produced by all of them. It lowers our costs, right? If you're in a single source, the only ride that I have to space is Company Y, well, guess what? Company Y is going to charge you a little bit more because they know that they're the only game in town. When you have Company X, Y, and Z, and they're all competing against each other, well, we benefit from the innovation, and my friends in Space Force have a concept they call assured access to space. When, I won't even say if, but when a launch vehicle fails, that launch vehicle is grounded for a while until you can figure out what went wrong and fix it. If you have only one company and they have a failure, you have to wait. If you have multiple companies and you have a thriving commercial launch vehicle market, you have assured access to space. You can you can put your spacecraft on another rocket if you need to. So, a healthy, thriving commercial launch vehicle market is a benefit to NASA. If they make vehicles that are commercially viable, they can sell them to NASA, they can sell them to the Space Force, they can sell them to Sirius XM radio, satellite TV, satellite internet. They can launch their own internet constellations like SpaceX is doing with Starlink, and Amazon's going to do their own space internet constellation called Kuiper and others. So we're actually, I think, on the precipice of a new space revolution because of all the commercial entities coming into space. And, we NASA, we're a customer of theirs. We're using those capabilities that they're developing. So yeah, we're not going away. We're some of their biggest fans.
That's great. And you did mention that SpaceX, has used rockets 10 or 11 times. So we've come a long way with building rockets, and we've been doing it for 50, 60, 70 years or whatever. But what new technologies are you seeing being used today in the spirit of efficiency and reusability?
We forgot two of my slides. I was too busy pontificating about competition. I'm going to talk to you, I'll get to that one. I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of the upcoming rockets. Yeah, so go ahead and go to the next slide, please, Cindy. So here are like the medium to big size rockets that are going to either be coming to market or have actually already flown. The Falcon Heavy in the middle there, that one's already flown 3 times, but the rest of the rockets that you see there haven't flown yet. And these are all, different companies, different entities building these and managing these, and they all have different capabilities. On the left side, you'll see the United Launch Alliance Vulcan. It's around 202 feet tall. I'm a little bit of a nerd, so I tried to scale these all correctly. So you go from 202 feet tall to just shy of 400 feet tall on the SpaceX Super Heavy and Starship. So capabilities range from, a Vulcan on the left side there can put about 27,000 kilograms into low Earth orbit. And then a Starship Super Heavy, the SLS on the far right, that's the Artemis 1 launch vehicle. That's what's sitting in the vehicle assembly building right now, going to launch the Orion capsule around the moon here in the coming months. That one can put about 95 tons to low Earth orbit. So, you're looking at just shy of 200,000 pounds. So yes, these are all big rockets. The rockets on the right side are about the same size as the Saturn V that launched, Neil and Buzz and Michael Collins to the moon back in the late 60s. And so we have 3 companies that are building Saturn V size rockets. 2 of them are essentially being funded. Well, 2 of them are being backed and funded by the 2 richest men in the world, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. And then the one on the far right is being funded by another fairly rich entity, the United States government. So, a lot of money being thrown around. But, that's actually something that's really cool here, is that these companies have their own commercial interests. Elon and Jeff both think, if I build these giant rockets, I can make money doing it. NASA, we don't make money building rockets. We have things we want to put into space. So the goal is a little bit different, but yet we both need big rockets to do the same thing. It's super cool to me. All right, so these are your big rockets that are kind of new and upcoming and going to sort of revolutionize space. And guess what? On the small side, go ahead and go to the next slide, there's all kinds of new stuff coming. Virgin Orbit, another one of the billionaires, Sir Richard Branson, has his own little rocket company. He can launch rockets off the bottom of a modified 747. Yeah. I like the reaction. Thank you.
It's a little rocket down
there. So to get an idea for scale, that little missile / rocket thingy hanging off the bottom of the 747, it's about 70 feet long. There's the Electron rocket that's built by a company called Rocket Lab USA. They launched from New Zealand. They're looking to start launching from Wallops, Virginia. Anybody here from Virginia or the DC area? Yeah, so you all will be able to see those launching here pretty soon. They have a bigger rocket that they're developing that they also want to launch from Virginia. And then Relativity Space, we'll talk about them in a minute, but they're trying to revolutionize how they build rockets using 3D printing. And then Astrospace is by far the smallest out of all of them. They're like 38 feet tall. They can only put like a little over 100 kilograms into low Earth orbit. But the cool thing about these rockets is my program actually uses launch services on these. 1, they're small. 2, they're cheap. But 3, there's such a thing called the CubeSat Launch Initiative. Has anybody heard of CubeSat and CubeSat Launch and the educational side of CubeSat? So, CubeSat, a single unit CubeSat's like 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters. It's about yay big. Students in high schools and colleges can build their own CubeSats, and they can go through NASA or Space Force or private entities and get themselves rides into space to actually, put something in orbit that will, send them a signal, do some sort of simple measurements, and like talk about hands-on. That's not something that I had available to me whenever I was in high school and college. These companies are actually enabling more of those educational satellites to be launched.
Right.
All right, so now technology and enablers.
Yeah, and like what is in the spirit of efficiency and sustainability, what are we doing that's new?
So we'll go ahead and go to the next slide. So for me right now, the 2 biggest things are reusability and 3D printing. Everyone knows that Falcon 9 rockets you can reuse the boosters, you can fly them back to land, you can catch them on ships. Everybody and their mother who's building a new rocket is baselining reusability. It's really hard, but again, that's the rallying cry, right? It's hard, but we're going to make it work. It's probably a little easier now that people know that it's actually doable and viable, and you can actually make the dollars and cents work. So I know of at least 3 new companies that are building new rockets that are being designed for reusability. The Jeff Bezos rocket, the New Glenn, the Blue Origin, the massive one that's about 300 feet tall, they're wanting to fly back boosters and catch them on ships. The relativity space, the one that's going to be 3D printing. So the GIF that's in the right there, they're actually 3D printing their booster tanks. It used to be you'd take big panels, you'd fold them around, you'd have seams, you'd weld the seams. I kind of like to think of relativity space as a 3D printing company that builds rockets versus a rocket company that 3D prints stuff, because they're like from the ground up 3D printing everything. And they're having to develop new 3D printing technology and methods to be able to build stuff that big. And that's just their small vehicle. They're wanting to 3D print an even bigger one. Anyone who has a small rocket out there has dreams of competing with the big boys. And not to leave my friends at Rocket Lab USA out, the engine on the bottom right, that's the engine that they put on their Electron rocket, the one that launches from New Zealand and will eventually launch from Wallops Field and Wallops Flight Facility in Virginia. Most of that rocket engine there, except for the colored parts, are 3D printed. So they have a printer that prints their rocket engines a layer at a time. And it's a small engine, you can actually kind of hold it in your hand, and they have a ring of 9 of them on the bottom. And that side of things excites me, because I've been to the rocket engine factory in West Palm Beach. Aerojet Rocketdyne makes an engine called the RL-10. It is a work of art. It is a beautiful engine, been flying since the 60s. It is a landmark in aerospace history, and it takes a true craftsman to build that thing. I love that engine. It takes very little craftsmanship to just load a file and print an engine. So it's almost like, I kind of like sort of feeling for like the lost art of bending tubes and silver brazing and stuff. But then I see the 3D printing side of things and I'm like, wow, they can print it exactly the same every single time. And I don't have to worry about, the tube bender down in West Palm Beach is going to be retiring real soon, right? Like, you just buy a new printer, you buy a new print stock, you load the file and you print.
Yeah, and I know, how many teachers in here do 3D printing in their classrooms? Okay, a few. So I know that's probably really relevant, especially for you. And with the expansion, Joe, of commercial space, commercialization in space, I know you and I have talked about the number of jobs available. So the educators here probably would like to know, what are those jobs in STEM that you are seeing available right now?
So I have a good friend. He's a dad in my son's Cub Scout pack, and he actually works for a engineering and technology recruiting firm. And we were talking one day, and he threw a staggering stat at me that in this area, in the technology and engineering fields, the ratio of open jobs to people that are qualified to fill them is 6-to-1. So for every 6 jobs that they have open in tech fields, they have 1 qualified candidate to fill those jobs. And that's just sort of in general in technical fields. Areas of software, especially specialized areas of software, is like an order of magnitude or more worse. So you're looking at, like, I think he said 200-to-1 in some very specialized software fields. So in other words, 200-to-1 is pretty much like you can't find somebody to fill that slot. So I'm hearing stories of companies, robbing employees from each other. An aerospace company may have a recruiting event. Another aerospace company will drive one of those little advertising trucks by that company's recruiting event saying, hey, come across the street, talk to us too. We'll probably give you more money. And I've even heard, real stories of offers being extended from the commercial aerospace world to government, NASA folks, where they're looking to increase their salaries by like 40%. All this is to say that, like, the engineering and STEM fields, there's a huge expansion of what we're trying to do, and the industry is having a hard time finding people to fill those jobs. It's a little scary, but it's also like, that should be y'all's rallying cry, right? Like, your country desperately needs you all to give us the absolute best talent you can put into the STEM pipeline. And I will say, some of the interns that I've met recently in my office, you're doing a great job. Like, they are just absolutely amazing kids. So, I say take heart, keep on doing what you're doing. And like, no joke, like your country really needs you. 6-1 for all jobs to qualified candidates. It's crazy.
And Joe, I'm going to skip down to another question because you mentioned it. You said your intern, you've talked to me a lot about your interns and how much he wants to hire them because they are ready to go. They are job ready. What is it that you're seeing in those kids that these teachers should be aware of so that they can, work on that, developing those skills in the classroom?
So I think probably the biggest thing that I've seen in our recent crop of interns and new hires, we have some new hires that were never interns for us, but they're fresh outs. First off, they're enthusiasts. They come in, they already know about a lot of this stuff. They know about rocketry, they're a part of rocketry clubs. They know about 3D printing. They may be aerospace engineers, but holy cow, they're really good at coding too. They just check so many boxes. Their STEM foundations are excellent. They have physics-based knowledge. Their engineering skills are good. Their math skills are good. Their coding is good, and they're enthusiastic about things too. And they're also really good communicators. You think of like the stereotypical engineers, mathematicians, and physicists. You think of the Big Bang Theory. They're a little quirky. They don't really want to talk to people. This crop of interns and new hires that we have, they can actually communicate at various levels, and they know how to do it too. One of the things that a lot of fresh outs struggle with is, communicating at the executive level. If you're talking to someone who is a program manager, they don't want to know about the nuts and the bolts of something. They want to know the big things. Tell me where the risks are, tell me where the problems are, and what you're going to do to fix those. But they can talk at that level, and they can also talk at the nuts and bolts level. So their technical communication skills are actually quite good for people who aren't even done with college. That's the other thing is that I'm like, man, these kids aren't even done baking yet, like they're like, what are they going to be when they actually have 2 more years of college under their belts?
And I think that's something I never thought of as a math teacher is how important it was for my students to be able to communicate math. Like you think of speech class or maybe even English class and having to talk, but never really thinking like some of these kids really need to be able to communicate in a STEM field, the content there. And so that's something that resonated with me as you were sharing that. So, Joe, I want to kind of shift to, we know we're going to the moon and Mars, and what are your thoughts for the future of NASA and space exploration?
Hopefully the audience can tell that I'm really excited about commercial enterprise and the innovation that they're bringing to the launch business. But the other side is I showed you all the new rockets. That's only half the equation, right? Rockets don't exist unless they have a reason to launch into space. So there's innovative stuff coming in the spacecraft arena as well, the things that we actually put into space with these rockets. And there's innovation on the commercial side of things, and there's innovation on the government side of things too. So I'll talk a little bit more about like the NASA missions that excite me because that's my bread and butter. I launched the science missions for the agency on the uncrewed rockets. But asteroids. All right, those are a big deal for a lot of reasons. Last November, we launched a mission from Vandenberg, California called Dart. And it's been cruising in space for a few months since November now. And in late September, early October, it's going to just slam into an asteroid called Dimorphos. Dimorphos is a pretty small asteroid. It's a little bigger than the Statue of Liberty, a little smaller than the Eiffel Tower. And the sole purpose of DART is to essentially prove out that, the predictions that we have of how much the orbit of Dimorphos is going to change after we hit it. This is NASA's first mission under the Planetary Defense moniker, and so it's essentially dedicated to you hit the asteroid and then you use ground-based observatories to measure the change in the asteroid's orbit. The idea being, if you know that an asteroid's incoming and you have some time to do something about it, you only have to change the orbit very small, and it will miss the Earth by millions and millions and millions of miles. This is the sort of brute force method. It's not like super techy, but it gets the job done, right? And we're going to prove that it's a viable method. On the asteroid front, and a little bit more sciencey in my mind, we have the Psyche mission. It's going to an asteroid called 16 Psyche, and it's a 140-mile wide asteroid, so appreciably bigger than Dimorphos. And it's an M-class asteroid. It's metal. It's got over, hold on, let me look at my note. Yeah, it's got over a quadrillion tons, it's believed, of iron and nickel. And being in the field that I'm in, that makes me tingle with excitement of what future generations could do with a quadrillion tons of iron and nickel and other rare metals already in space. Finding water in space is like finding money. Finding metal in space is like finding money too. Every ounce that you don't have to leave Earth with that's already in space saves you thousands of dollars. So Psyche is huge. Now Psyche, we're not going there to harvest the metal. The mission is it's very science oriented. It's going to orbit and it's going to look and confirm for us the metals that are there and how much of them there are, how much metal to rock ratio it really is. But that's just the first mission that's going to Psyche. I'm sure that the future generations are going to figure out some amazing things to do with that much metal in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. And then in the longer term, we talked about James Webb Space Telescope, right? Like they're just starting their science mission. And I think that, the really cool posters and backdrops and the science that came from Hubble, we're going to see that in droves coming from James Webb. After James Webb, and really it will be flying concurrently with James Webb, we have another observatory that we're going to be launching. It's called the Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope, and it's a giant space telescope. It's going to be optical, so it has a giant mirror, and not as big as James Webb though, but it will also be doing some excellent astrophysics science for us. And then a couple missions that I'm really excited about is we have a series of missions going to Jupiter's moon, Europa. Europa is really cool because aside from Earth and Mars, the next logical candidate for life in the solar system is Jupiter's moon, Europa, because we're pretty sure that under about 1 kilometer of ice is oceans of water. And it doesn't matter where you go on the Earth. It could be the most desolate, abandoned, deepest, darkest place you've ever been. If there's water, there's microbial life. So that's the next logical place for us to go to visit, to look for the evidence of life, precursors for life, the correct conditions for life. And then we also have a mission that's launching to Saturn's moon, Titan, called Dragonfly. It's a helicopter, gonna be really cool. All these missions, the future missions, rely on the work that you and your colleagues do. I'm really excited for them. I hope that you are too. Hopefully that you all pulled some of my excitement about where we're going and what we're doing with some of these missions, and you can channel that and pull it into your students and encourage them to enter into STEM career fields, because when I hired into the STEM arena, it was hard to find a job, actually. I'm still to this day baffled and amazed and surprised that I got the call from NASA. But it was hard finding a job in 2005, and that is not the case in 2022 and likely for the foreseeable future. And one thing that I forgot to mention, not everybody has the means or the grades to go to college to be an engineer. There are factories in the United States that are churning out rockets and spacecraft. If you have students that are STEM inclined, they need welders, machine operators, 3D printer operators, people that know the foundations of how stuff is built and how stuff is made. Quality inspectors, people that can do fluoropenetrant inspection, looking for cracks in metal. None of that requires a college degree, but it requires someone who's STEM inclined to actually know how stuff is made, how stuff works, how to operate the machines that actually build these rockets. It's a big deal. And those skills are actually really in demand right now too. And I know, all right, we still have time, good. All right, the other thing that I'll say is that the cool thing about the space industry and aerospace, we are legally required by Congress to purchase US-built rockets. So every rocket that we build has to be by a US-owned and run company, and the rocket itself has to be over 50% US sourced, and granted, most of them are way more than that. So we're talking like thousands of jobs in Alabama, thousands of jobs in Washington, California, all over the country. There's last I heard, like 400,000 or so jobs associated with NASA and the space program and everything that we're trying to do, and private industry is trying to do too. It's a big deal, and the cool thing is that, like, you know, the jobs for this are all over the place.
That's great. Well, Joe, I want to shift gears because we want to talk really briefly about ways to get students excited about Artemis, which is our mission to the moon and Mars. And I did want to mention, back at the NASA booth, we have a couple of resources for you. And one is this little packet of Artemis cards, and it kind of tells the story of Artemis and the different technologies involved, so I'd encourage you to pick one of those up. The other thing that I am really excited about is, you know, for students to participate in STEM, they need representation. They need to see themselves in STEM by seeing others like them. And so NASA came out with this first woman graphic novel about a fictional character named Callie who goes to the moon. And this is available. We have these in English back at the booth in print, but it's available in Spanish online. You can download it in English online. There is an app. And so on. So I would encourage you to pick this up, and again, you can get it free online as well. And then we also have many Artemis student challenges that are available, and those will be opening up in the fall for students and teachers. And then there's some things on the website, and the website is actually in the blue box. It's a little bit hard to see, stem.nasa.gov/Artemis. But there's also some ways to have a launch event, to watch the launch virtually with your students and get excited about that, because it is a big rocket. Will be very exciting to watch. There's also an Artemis Learning Pathway you can sign up for that gives you the inside scoop on what's happening with the launch. So those are just some ways to engage your students in what's happening and get them excited about these jobs that we've been talking about. So, with that said, Kelly, I don't know, we have maybe a time for a question. I don't know if we want to do that or have time to do that, but it looks like...
While they're working up their courage to ask their question, tonight, 8:39 p.m., there is a launch from Kennedy Space Center. It's a SpaceX Falcon 9 launching supplies to the space station. A little insider joke, we say that the space station supply missions, they're launching M&Ms and underwear to the space station.
Ooh.
More than just that, though.
I have a question before the other question.
Okay.
Has China really landed in the dark side of the moon and the other side? Is that a real thing, or that's a make-believe thing?
I've seen no evidence to the contrary, so yeah, they're there.
Well, and that is part of my question about what are the laws and policies? Like, is it really like who gets there first? Oh, how are the resources, right? Because I get really excited about the water deposits and all the resources, but how does that work as far as, I know this, who owns it, right? Can they own it? Real estate, like how do you determine real estate or own, or what are the laws around that?
Unless somebody else in the audience knows the answer to that, I'll ad-lib a little bit. I know that I don't know if it's law. I believe that it's written into sort of international agreement and convention. The United States has the Artemis Accords, but not all nations have signed up to the Artemis Accords. So, you know, in my mind, it probably comes down to sort of like being a gold rush. Whoever is there gets it. And the U.S. and our partners will abide by the Artemis Accords, and then anybody else who goes, they'll abide by whatever conventions that they believe are the right conventions to employ. But yeah, I don't think there's anything that's, you know, this is how it's exactly going to be. It'll be we're going to figure it out as we go sort of thing.
Yeah, I have a question. Dwayne Cormier, VCU, Culture Spotted Solutions. I guess I'm just curious about Space Force. How should we really understand? Because it seems like it was, you know, a few months ago it was a joke, but seemingly it's not a joke today. So
there's a show about it and everything, right?
Yeah, so how should we think about that, and what are some opportunities with regards to maybe equity and those type of things of, like, what should we be telling students about Space Force, if you will?
So, you know, there was the Air Force, and then now they created another service branch, the Space Force. And similar to the United States military, there are opportunities there. And I would say that if you have students that are interested in space, and again, they don't have the means to pay for their own way into college, Space Force is an option, right? I seriously considered doing Air Force ROTC scholarship to go to my university. I chose not to go that route. But the way that what I see Space Force doing now is essentially they're taking over the Air Force's role in space launch. The Air Force has been launching stuff into space for almost as long as NASA has. They're just not as big and visible. Thank you, Cindy. They're not as big and visible as the NASA launches. We're launching Mars rovers, and people are really excited about that. Space Force is kind of like, tomorrow we're going to launch a spy satellite. It's going somewhere we can't tell you and doing things that you're not going to know about. But I have counterparts that literally do the exact same job that I do for Space Force missions, for spy satellites, for the GPS navigation satellites. Lots of great jobs in Space Force, both on the contractor side, being like sort of the technical representative for a Space Force entity, and also, people who are enlisted, people who are officers in the Space Force, to essentially do similar roles to what I do and what my team does for their missions. Again, they're buying commercial rockets and they're buying commercial satellites, and they're just trying to push that needle a little bit more toward the highest probability of mission success.
I realize we're over on time, so I want to turn it back to Kelly. Are you sure?
One last question.
Okay.
Does NASA have, I'm Ulysses Sepulveda from Milwaukee. Do you have some sort of program or some sort of assistance if I want to bring 20 kids to a live launch in Texas or whatever? Do you host them? Do you?
I think the answer is yes, and that's about all I know. I do know that there was a representative from the public affairs group at Kennedy Space Center in the audience, but I think he stepped out. But those programs do exist, but I don't know where to point anybody to.
And I'm at NASA headquarters in DC, so I am not sure. I do have teammates here from Kennedy Space Center who might be able to answer that at the booth. You could check and see. But I do know we have competitions and challenges, and there are students at the launch that's happening, I think, this week. So there are ways. I just have to check with them. But thank you, everybody, for your time.
Thank you so much.